Starting.
Okay, so we're now live with I think this is the 8th Community Amnesia Fortnite Mentor stream. With me I have Paul. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself and explain what it is you do at Double Fine?
Yeah, hey, I'm Paul O'Rourke. I'm a senior sound designer at Double Fine. Been here since Once Upon a Monster is my first title I worked on. And yeah.
Nice. So what do you think, because Once Upon a Monster started as an Amnesia Fortnite title, if I remember right.
Happy Song.
Happy Song, right, yeah. So what do you think is the most important thing you've learned from doing Amnesia Fortnite or from any other game jam type things that you've done?
It looks like the camera's only on you again. Here, let me see if I can fix it.
Let's fix that.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Now it's me, right? I think it'll switch. Anyways, yeah, so one thing that you learn is what to start on, you know, what's available to work on and how to prioritize your time. And then letting go of things is pretty important. I think that's a really big one. We have a new guy on our team starting this week or 2 weeks ago. So he's basically starting Double Fine and audio during Amnesia Fortnite. And he's coming from, he worked on Obzu and he just finished What Remains of Edith Finch, and he helped us with Full Throttle a little bit. So it's for him, the idea of letting things go with all these bugs is kind of destroying his soul. I'm trying to get him to understand that it's okay for things to be rudimentary, as long as, you know, you want to have coverage and things feeling full more than you care about, you know, things being perfect and bug-free.
Right. And is there anything that you're hoping to learn specifically out of this Amnesia Fortnite?
This time we're doing it a little differently. We're doing, instead of one of us owning a project each, we're doing all three of us on every project. So what I'm trying to learn from this is basically managing our roles properly. So Steve's kind of been handling a lot of the Wise into Unreal 4 integration stuff, whereas I've been kind of managing Steve and keeping Camden in the loop and serving as that bridge. So the biggest thing for me from this Amnesia Fortnite is this new model of our audio team, I guess, and putting it through its paces and trying to figure out where it works and where it doesn't. I don't know if that's necessarily specific. That doesn't really work for everybody as far as advice goes, but personally, that's what my focus has been for this Amnesia Fortnite.
It seems pretty common across most of the people we've talked to is like, let's get all the teething with Unreal out of the way and get practice at shipping stuff.
Basically.
Seems like a good way to sort of explore those areas with lower consequence than a large-scale shipping game. So yeah, just to quickly recap on some of the progress that we've had over the past few days since we last did a mentor stream. We've had a new table go in, which has a bit more focus on allowing the ball to flow back and forth between sides. We've had some improvements on ball behavior and network handling and some UI changes as well to help make things work a bit better. And really what we're aiming to do over the next few days is to sort of aim to kind of just focus on refining what we have, polish what we have, and put new features in, try and get the paddle control and ball handling feeling a little bit better, feeling like you're in a little bit more control over where, you know, the deflection of the ball is going to result in it going. But yeah, it feels like we're on track to have something interesting before the end of Amnesia Fortnite, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I like what I saw.
Yeah, sweet. So we've got a few questions coming in from chat, but before we dive into those, I was going to ask you what strategies you had, if any, when doing this kind of fast prototyping stuff to speed up processes.
Let's see. I mean, every game's a little different. So since we're doing 4 here, you know, we have a VR game. The VR game is something we just did. We're pretty hands off with in the beginning because it's really hard to. The title speaks for itself. They really were trying to figure out their game. But most of the time we work on things like ambience and music, and we look for things that are not timing based that we can start on early. And the more content you can get front loaded is going to make your life a lot easier, because in our case, we have a full studio of people, but there's still only going to be so many animators per project, and you're going to get a lot of this stuff coming in super hot. So you want to have as much bandwidth freed up by then as possible. It's like the biggest thing for Amnesia Fortnite is really managing your time properly. And hitting the things that are available so that your time is solely spent on the last minute content, which is surely going to happen every single time.
And how valuable do you think it is for audio people to have music skills and vice versa?
I don't know how vital it is. I can't see it being a bad thing, but I don't consider it something crucial. I've worked with people that are way more music focused that have shifted into sound design, and they tend to bring a different style to things, and they have a different ear for certain things. They tend to understand mixing a lot better. I think it's important to try everything, but if you're really one of those focused on like just purely on sound design, there's nothing wrong with that, and you're going to be a lot better at certain things, and there's probably going to be projects that are really tailored to you a lot better.
Reed Harris Cooper has asked, in sound design, how much do you create beforehand and how much do you make based off created assets? How do you go about figuring these things out?
Some content, like I'll use the Ninja Fortnite as an example. So for Darwin, for instance, the world was kind of concepted out really early when they had the sci-fi images and stuff. So I was able to look at that landscape and just get started on it. And anything weird, like today I had to pull the thunder out of it because we didn't end up needing it, but that was like a 5-second fix. So getting that stuff done and really spending the early days, I got to spend, a few hours just kind of like playing with wind noises and figuring out synth patches to kind of give it a weird alien sound and doing lots of fun stuff like that, because there's not, like, putting that in the game early basically added so much to their experience when they were making the game. They play the game and they'd hear this huge ambience to fill up the world, which helped them out a lot, but then it didn't really matter for timing. I haven't had to touch it besides removing the thunder, so that was kind of that's a good example of something you can start on.
Nice. Kyle 3Win is asking, what are the most important sounds in a game besides dialogue and music?
What are the most important sounds? It depends on the game, but like for Gods Must Be Hungry, for example, I think that the food needs to feel perfect. It needs to feel big. It needs to feel exciting. The process of cooking needs to feel, and it's like if you're playing Zelda, whenever you interact with something, there's this nice little musical jingle, and that whole process is really, by itself, carries the cutscene. It's really fun. So like in those situations, the audio, or actually in your guys' game is a great example, because there's a lot of time where the ball's just kind of bouncing around and you're waiting for that player interaction to come back when the ball hits. So like, it's really important that everything that's happening there is super interesting while the player's not doing anything. But yeah, it really depends on the situation. And the mix is really important. So knowing where the sounds need to sit in the mix, when the music needs to come up, and tools like Wise or Fmod will let you do a lot of flexible things like that to choose when you want sounds to be important. But yeah, a lot of it is having a good ear for it and picking your moments. But I wouldn't say there's a hard and fast rule for which sounds are need to have. I forget the way it was worded, but need to have that focus.
Yeah. Kyle has also asked, how do you decide when to record a sound or when to use something from a library?
Very good question. And I think if you have a really good recording space, you should do it more often than not. I mean, if you're gonna, like a door, if you have a library of door sounds, I don't think it's a travesty to just use a library sound with the door or something. But if you have something cool that's never been done before, you should try your best to do something original for it. And of course, don't use the door sound that's used everywhere in the most common library or something. It's fun to buy new libraries and try things out. But yeah, I think recording often as possible is best, because you're going to have something new and different that has never been used before. Even if it sounds like something similar, it's not recorded the same way. It wasn't in the same room. So I think it's something you should do more often than not. But if your sound space is not good, yeah, that's in the chat. Wilhelm scream. No, don't use that ever. Or if you're going to use it, heavily modify it or something.
Yeah. I think there's this kind of oral point of difference that you kind of want to aim for there, I think.
Right.
Kyle has a third question and has asked, what is your favorite audio plugin, or what is one plugin that every sound designer should have?
I think it depends on, I'm sorry to give you these weird answers, but it just depends on the class of everyone should have a really good reverb and a really good modulation plugin. And if we go by category, I think the Valhalla reverbs are fantastic and they're really cheap. I think you can get the vintage verb for like $50, and I use that all the time. But as far as bundles go, Sound Toys is really good. You can get a lot of flexibility out of that. I use it for music. I use it for sound design. Eventide has a great bundle. And these bundles go on sale usually during the holidays or some kind of milestone, there'll be some big sale and you can get them for like 50% off, and those things will last you forever. Oh, Native Instruments is really good for, you can use that stuff for a lot of things. I think they have pretty flexible bundles, so you can always buy it piecemeal, but there's also, you know, like a light bundle and a heavy bundle, and you can get a lot more out of it, but those will take you very far. Yeah, Sound Toys, Eventide, GRM plugins are really cool if you like doing just purely sound design work. They're mostly tools for sound design, I found. But yeah, there's not one essential plugin I can think of that's going to get you more mileage than its very niche use.
JCT Wood has asked, is procedurally generated sound something that interests you? And have any Double Fine projects used procedurally generated audio?
No, we have not. It is fascinating to me. I haven't seen many games that have done it, but the one that I did see a talk for was Grand Theft Auto had a sound generator in their game, and it was doing all the background ambience for the most part, and like dog barks and stuff. And I didn't know that when I played the game, and I never thought, this sounds like a background generated noise. You know, it just sounded like cool ambience. So it's really effective, and it saves a lot on memory bandwidth, it sounds like. So I'm very interested in investigating that, especially with the scope of Psychonauts 2. It could be something really cool for us to try out. So it's definitely on my radar to check out, but I haven't had much experience with it yet.
Yeah, sweet. Fragmental Stew has asked, how important is it for you to get your sounds and music in the game as soon as possible?
For me, I think for everyone it's important. I think when sound gets in the game, it kind of changes the experience quite a bit. So for the sound designer, it's really good to get it in, because the longer you play with it, the more you'll go, oh, you know what? Like after 20 days of playing with that jump sound, it's starting to get really repetitive. And then you'll have those variations. It's kind of like anything, I guess, you know, you iterate and iterate and iterate. So more time is better. It's not, there's going to be, like in this process, for example, there's going to be cutscenes coming in super late, and we're going to get one chance to do it, and you're going to have to be okay with that. Games kind of like my boss says, riding a wave, and you kind of have to follow where it's going. So if you can look ahead and see, you try to look ahead and see where you can put things in as early as possible so that you do have more time to iterate on them, but there's going to be lots of scenarios where you can't. But as early as possible is the answer to that question, I think.
JCT Wood has also asked, how often, if at all, do you go into the engine to tweak the balance of sounds in the game, especially if they're in 3D space?
Usually when I implement a sound, I want to get it feeling good right away, and I'll spend time on it until it feels good. And then, you know, you're going to make tweaks throughout the project. That's part of kind of the last question, is iterating on it. But I tend to kind of like, when you do the final mix for the game, you really need to put yourself in the position of someone who's never played it before, and you're really trying to listen really critically. And that's when you'll do those really final tweaks on attenuation and spacing, and how loud is it? That's stuff that you might play the game for 6 months and you won't notice the sound is annoying, but then on your final mix pass, you'll be like, oh my God, we gotta fix that. I can't believe I've let that be here for so long. Yeah, I think do it best as possible in the first go, and then try to catch it all in your last pass is like the two biggest steps for when you should be iterating on it, stuff like that.
So how early do you, like, when you're working on stuff, how frequently do you want to hear it in the game? Like, is that something that you do implementation yourself, or do you hand it off to other people to handle?
You know, the more I've been working here, the more I've become independent on that side of things. I'm not as independent as I like to be, and just like I wouldn't want a programmer designing my sounds, there's some scripts I'm sure they don't want me touching in case I break something. I like to do it myself as much as possible, and I think it's a really good trait to have. I don't think it's crucial to know as a sound designer, but I think it's important to understand that role to an extent so that you know where things go and you know what to tell the programmers for how to implement it. It's pretty normal for sound designers to be, I'd say a lot of sound designers work in the sound design landscape, and they trust their teammates they work with the programmers to how to implement it and get it sounding well. And there's usually a back and forth process to that. So if it's something as simple as like, I want this to play a sound when I walk by it, you know, that's not so bad. But if you're like, oh, when the game state is this, then I needed to do this, and based on how close it is, I needed to drive this RTPC that'll affect the low pass filter or something. Then that gets a little trickier, and you might want to ask for some help on something like that, unless you're comfortable with it. It really depends. It's all personal skill level thing, and I don't think any of it's essential, but it can't hurt. It's like knowing music as well as sound design. It can't hurt, but I wouldn't say it's essential. If you're interested in it, I definitely suggest exploring it.
Do you find yourself working with other team members outside of that, getting stuff implemented scope?
Yeah, I think that's my favorite part of game development, is how much of a team effort it is. I feel like everyone here is basically like a family member, and not that's necessarily not required for working with a team, but you really need to understand all the different disciplines, because you need to know where your sounds are going to go and what the rules are for how that's going to work. If a sound's going to be driven by animation versus script, if it's going to be an ambient source point versus a two-dimensional, ambience, and there's how dialogue is triggering, what's 2D, what's 3D, and how that's all going to work. It depends. That all changes where it's going to get implemented. So understanding all of that will help you know who to talk to. And knowing what they do and how their job works will help you understand how best to do your sounds. Because you go, oh, I remember that you can't hook them this way, so I need to think about how I want to do my sound given those constraints. I think it's very helpful.
Yeah, awesome. JTC Wood is also asking, what is the weirdest Foley sound you've discovered?
The weirdest Foley sound? We had this really cool PVC pipe thing. I don't know how to describe it because it was such a weird thing. I'd never seen it before. I think they probably use it for some kind of ventilation system or something. But basically, it was like this big plastic tube, and then it scrunched up super small. But when you pulled it, it had this like, I don't even know how to describe it as the weirdest sound. It was like, but like when you put a microphone inside of it, we would record it at like 96K, and then you pull it, and we would do weird formats with it while we're moving it. And then if you take it into like Pro Tools and pitch it down and do all this stuff to it, you would just get some really cool sounds out of it by itself. But then if you put it through a bunch of plugins, you get a bunch of crazier shit. So that was really, really awesome.
And do you find yourself doing much field recording?
1 second, this prompt blocked me. Okay, there we go. We usually didn't very much. It depends. Usually we go in these big bursts where we field record a lot, and then we get pulled into crunch, and then we're just heads down and just trying to get things in under the milestone or under the deadline, But I'd say Psychonauts 2 is our first time really having a lot of pre-production bandwidth. So Camden and I have made an effort to go out and record a lot of stuff in the city. We have no want of construction sounds, as there's just been perpetual construction in San Francisco for the last 5 years on our street. So we're good on that side of things, but it's been fun to get like a lot of water stuff, especially, Raz has got a lot of ties into water with his family. So trying to get some cool stuff for that. I think we're planning like a nature trip and just trying to get some more recordings, original recordings, and trying to stay out of libraries more for this project. But I'd say in the past, not as often. Usually in little spurts, we'll do a lot of stuff and then we won't do it for like 6 months.
Do you ever find that you need to consciously work with silence in the way that artists will sometimes work with negative space?
Do you mean in the sense like I sit in silence and think about it, or do you mean
for like crafting periods of silence to appear in the game?
I think so. I think that's part of just reading the mood of the scene and understanding what the sound needs to do to support it. Shows like Breaking Bad do a great job of like, we're not going to spam music on this scene because the scene is very emotional on its own, and understanding that and where your sounds are going to support. Same with, knowing when your sounds need to be above the music or below the music. I think that just takes time to figure out. If it's, it's like a ear for it, I guess. And it's all subjective for the most part.
Kyle3Win is asking, how involved do you and Cam get in dialogue recording?
I've been in a few sessions, but most of them are recorded in LA with Chris. So I usually will just see video of it later, and I get the recording sessions to edit. So I'll get to hear the whole thing. But yeah, I've only been involved once, and it was just in a helping Chris make it run smoothly capacity. So not much in the recording process, but everything afterwards we're heavily involved in.
And JCT Wood has asked, what is the next thing you're excited to work on in Psychonauts 2, if there's something that you can talk about?
Honestly, I mean, not to be a cop-out answer, but like everything is really freaking cool. So there's not really anything I'm not excited about. I guess it's still really early pre-production, so I'm very eager for things to start kind of finalizing. Like I mentioned, you know, you can only do so much with sound in the early phases. A lot of sketching and getting things ready and trying things out. But as far as getting it in the game and feeling like final-ish takes a while. So I'm really eager just to start seeing some levels kind of reach that stage so that we can kind of like push the audio to the quality boundary we're looking for and see if we can get it there. I think that's what I'm most excited for, is that first. And then with our third member as well, just like really seeing what our new strategy for audio can bring to the game.
Yeah, sweet. And how important do you think, because you mentioned, you know, like sketching out stuff, how important do you think placeholder sounds are for during a game jam type environment?
In game jams, I think they tend to stay placeholder often, but I think they're very important. People work different with sound. People forget there's going to be sound sometimes when they don't hear anything. So I think getting sound in early will help set the mood. Especially when it's an art, you know, and you're bringing what you feel would be great for the soundscape, and getting that in as early as possible helps people synergize your sound with their visuals, and you know, they're not going to like rewrite their whole game based on your sound, but a lot of times it can help, like, oh, I wouldn't have done the VFX this way if I hadn't heard the ambience, so now I'll do the VFX this way, or I'll make sure that I include that like static electricity kind of, you know, there's lots of little things that you can benefit from getting sounds like that early.
And Fragmentals 2 is asking, when composing game music, do you draw inspiration more from game music or non-game music?
That's a good question. Non-game music for sure. I think I love game music, but I think most of my when I listen to music in my free time, I tend to go outside of game music, and then those styles get reincorporated into my music. I mean, in music has existed for a lot longer than video games have, so there's just a lot more inspiration to draw on there. Maybe in 100 years, someone will be like, "Oh, I've only been listening to game music my entire life."
And do you find any challenges with composing? I don't know if you do any composing for stuff outside of games, or like in terms of creating stuff that can make sense regardless of what, you know, how the player approaches a particular space or a particular moment in the game. Do you see any like challenges that are unique to game music there?
I think game music is very difficult because with a film score, you know, and most times, I don't want to generalize anyone's profession, but just in a film, you know, it's very linear, and how it goes from beginning to end is never going to change. And even the editing of the movie is kind of built in a way like this is going to be the emotional part, and you can kind of follow them. The music is a little easier to map there, I think, but the bar is a lot higher for how good it needs to be, I think, as well. So there's different challenges there. But with games, a lot of composers just don't have experience on the game development side of things. So getting them to understand how it's going to be implemented, what it means when cutscene happens, and the different game states, and really maximizing their music, getting stems and integrating all that. Actually, that's a big thing about doing game music, is understanding the value of stems and getting more value out of, or more minutes out of the music. Basically, if you have a 2-minute cue, but you give me all your stems, I can do some sub mixes and kind of make it into like an 8-minute cue, or I can have it kind of like randomize some things and make it feel more varied, because a player might hang out in the room for 8 minutes or something, and you don't really want them to hear the same 2-minute cue for forever. Actually, in Halo, they did a cool thing. Marty O'Donnell, he if you were in a room for a long time, they just killed the music. It was kind of your signal to be like, you're not supposed to be here anymore. I wouldn't say that's something you should do in every game, but those are some of the challenges that you can come run into.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've got JCT Wood is asking, have you ever messed with any circuit bending or hardware synths?
Not really. I definitely am more of the digital background for music. I mean, I came up playing music on guitar and like metal bands and stuff like that. So that side of it is more analog, but I didn't start getting into synthesized music or electronic music or anything until it was all mostly digital. So no, unfortunately I don't. But I kind of, when I discovered like chiptunes and things later on, I was kind of wished that I had got into that scene because it seemed like a lot of fun.
Yeah. So before we wrap up for today, because I think we're getting close to time again, you've had a listen to some of the music tracks that contributors have given to the project. Do you have any feedback and sound effects as well? Do you have any feedback for anybody?
Yeah. Let's see. I was trying to figure out like what the aesthetic was. When I look at the visuals, I'm trying to. It kind of feels a little sci-fi-ish. I mean, it's very like flat. I'm trying to think of the right words to describe it, but like it seemed pretty open for what the sound could be. And like I said, there's so much going on when you're not playing that's just driven by sound at that point that I really wanted to hear a lot of interesting sounds. And when I listened to the files, they weren't integrated yet, but they were really cool and they were very musical. There's a lot of like hits organized by pitch. So I was very interested to hear how that would sound implemented. It's hard to, it's like I can picture it in my head sounding amazing, but it's always different once it's in the game how it sounds. So
Right.
I like the way that was going. I mean, if I'm going to nitpick anything, I guess the hover sound on the main menu is a little harsh, and I would maybe either turn it down a lot or try something a little softer. Most times the player doesn't really need too much feedback they're hovering. The visuals will do it, and just something really soft and short will help there. And then I liked the menu queue, and then but when I listened to the other cues that were composed, there was like 3 other ones I believe. I really liked the energy of those, and then when I went back to the main menu again, I almost kind of wanted to hear that same energy again. And this is completely subjective because on my first play it was totally fine, but then I was thinking like once I'd heard those cues, then I wanted to say instead of pong ball, I was like pong ball, you know. So it's like really want to hear. I could see it being a little more high energy for the music on the main menu, but the music cue itself was great. It had a cool vibe. I liked it.
Yeah. I think the game's going to feel a little bit more interesting when we get more music cues in. We're at the moment we're kind of deciding whether we want to have like a menu queue and then different stuff when you start a game, or whether we want to have something that just plays constantly and will like randomly shift from track to track, or how we want to try and organize that stuff. I think longer term, if this continues on beyond Amnesia Fortnite, I think we'd have because we're gearing it in a way that people can contribute sort of whatever they want. We'll try and find a way to fit into the game. I think we'd maybe try and implement some kind of like user customizable playlist of stuff that you want to hear, so that you can tailor your experience a little bit that way.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. How I was wanting to hear it when I was playing was I did want to hear a new music cue for the gameplay versus the main menu. But you should try it all and see what you guys like, and if you have time. I know that time is not a very big commodity during the game, but if you do, I would try it out, just see what you like. That's usually the best way to figure it out.
Yeah, definitely. Well, before we wrap up, was there anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for their involvement in this. This is freaking awesome. It's cool seeing everyone jam alongside us and experience this. It's really fun. It's stressful and it's never going to be exactly what you want, but I think it's a really important experience, and I think it's really brave people to just put themselves out there and try it. So I just wanted to say hats off to everybody who's doing this. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's been great to be working alongside you guys as well, in spirit. So thanks heaps for joining us. It's been a lot of fun to have a chat here.
Yeah.
And I think we've got one mentor stream left, so keep an eye out for that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this. You guys have a great day. Good luck with the game.
Yeah, cheers.
All right, see ya.
See ya.